Today, I'm pleased to be joined by David Rubenstein, co-founder and co-chairman of the Carlyle Group, and a man of many talents as a philanthropist, show host, author, and newly minted sports team owner. David will help us bring everything together to assess what the election means for investments. And if we have time, we can squeeze in a question about Baltimore Orioles. Welcome. Great to have you here.
My pleasure.
So I'll just get right into it. How do you believe the election could impact financial markets, and how should the clients invest in such an election year?
Well, there's always a tendency to want to have advance information, legal advance information, and to know what's going to happen in the future. But the truth is, it's probably not a great idea to invest 6 months in advance based on how you think an election might happen, because generally you might be wrong and therefore you might make a mistake. As a general rule of thumb, I think it's best to kind of not assume that if the Democrats win, it's going to be a certain economy a certain way, or if the Republicans win, it's going to be a certain economy a certain way. Over the last 75 years, the economy has been roughly the same GDP growth-wise, if it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration. Over the last 75 years, the average GDP growth under a Democratic administration has been roughly 6.6% per annum. Under a Republican administration, roughly 6.4%. So the difference is infinitesimal, honestly. So I don't think it'll make that much difference. Similarly, if the Congress is all in one party, it doesn't really mean that a united government's going to go a certain way and everything's going to be better. Actually, the GDP growth is better when you have divided government. So I would tell people, don't try to worry about where the economy is going to be 6 months or 8 months in advance. You're going to probably be wrong if you try to predict where it's going to go because of the election outcome.
Yeah. In every one of our reports, we say don't vote with your portfolio, express your view with your votes, not with your investment selection.
My general view of the investment world and this kind of thing for most investors is the most important thing you can do is pick a good money manager who has a good track record, appropriate fees, disclosure, and so forth. That is going to be a bigger difference in your rate of return than anything else trying to predict the elections or so forth.
Yes, music to our ears. So we know the president and Congress are not the only policymakers in town, David. All eyes obviously have been on the Fed. Do you believe the election will play into their decision making at all?
Well, the Federal Reserve are composed of humans, so naturally they're not going to be unaware of what's going on. But I think to the extent that they want to have some eye on their election, it is to not be in the middle of the election campaign. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that they do have rate cuts, I'm pretty sure they'd want to get them out of the way before the election campaign really heats up. In this country, presidential election campaigns historically start after Labor Day. So my guess is the Federal Reserve would like to have its cuts, assuming they do it, and they said they would, out of the way before September. Because after September, they start making rate cuts. It's clear that people will criticize them, saying you're trying to help the Democrats or something. And President Trump has already said something to that effect. So I think the rate cuts, if they're going to come, and I'm sure they will probably be before September.
Yeah. And I mean, time is running out a little bit. It just gives a very short window between June and September. But
it's a short window, but the Fed can do it, obviously. And they've telegraphed that they're going to do 3 rate cuts, more or less. But they can change their mind. As Jay Powell likes to say, he's very data-driven, and the Fed is data-driven. So the data shows something different than what they anticipated. They'll probably do something different than what they previously said. But based on what they have today, I suspect they feel 3 rate cuts or 2 or 3 rate cuts will be done, and I suspect before the Labor Day.
Labor Day. Great, thank you. So if you put the election aside for a second, earlier in our conversation, we covered some of the geopolitical tension points in this multipolar world. At Carlyle, you invest across geographies. So how does this play into your investment decisions?
Well, geopolitical events that are unanticipated have an impact in the short term because people are surprised and they react adversely typically. We have 3 geopolitical events going on right now, you could argue, and they're well anticipated by the market, so I don't think there's going to be a big surprise, anything happening there. They are Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, and China, Taiwan. And right now, I think things pretty much are known where they're likely to be over the next couple of months, not for certain, but I don't think anything happening, any of those 3 geopolitical things is likely to dramatically change the markets because it's unlikely something dramatic is going to happen there. If something were to happen in a part of the world that we didn't anticipate, then it'll have some impact on the markets. But generally, these geopolitical events probably don't dramatically change the stock market or dramatically change the investment outlook.
Okay. So not necessarily inflection points, but maybe short-term volatility. So one consequence of the geopolitical tensions has been the renewed focus on critical infrastructure spending. Some would say that U.S. finally has an industrial policy for the first time since 1970s, 80s. How do you see this feeding through opportunities in private markets?
Well, infrastructure is deteriorated in this country. If anybody travels to other parts of the world, Abu Dhabi or Singapore, good examples, or Hong Kong, you see infrastructure that's unlike anything we have in the United States. You have to explain to people in some parts of the world what a pothole is. You don't have to explain to people in the United States what a pothole is. So our infrastructure has fallen behind. The infrastructure legislation that passed is great, but it will take a long time to get something done. And we saw when the bridge collapsed the other day in the Baltimore area that will take a long time to fix. These things take a long time to fix. That bridge took 5 years to build, may take almost that long to fix it. And so when you're talking about airports or telecommunications infrastructure or bridges or roads, you're talking about 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. So I think it's a great area in which to invest, and a lot of great investments have been made there, assuming you're recognized you're going to get high single-digit, low double-digit rates of return on average.
Okay. If we just stay on this topic of geopolitics, I read a quote from you that one of the biggest risks is actually right here in the United States, and it's government dysfunction. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, the famous cartoon, the Al Cap cartoon was, "I've seen the enemy and it's us." So I think I worry more about the fact that our country can't really govern itself that effectively in Congress. Because as you see, we have a crazy situation now. For example, the Republicans in the House of Representatives have roughly a 2-seat majority. But they're running like as if they have they're operating it as if they have a 50-seat majority. You can't really get things through with the 2-seat majority very easily. Yet they don't seem to be changing their tactics very much. When you have to worry about whether your debt limit bill is going to pass or whether the government has to be funded, that's a serious waste of time because the government has to fund itself and we have to have the debt limit. But going through the machinations, I think, makes people around the world say, why do you want me to have your type of democracy? You tell me my democracy is not good or my government's not good. You guys cannot even fund your own government. So it's very hard for us to tell people around the world that they should follow our lead when we can't even run our own government.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that obviously one issue that will take some level of bipartisanship is addressing our national debt. I mean, many prominent figures in our industry, from Jamie Dimon to Larry Fink, has been sounding the alarm. How concerned are you at this moment, and what do you think the impact could be?
Well, I like to think that all of my gray hair came about worrying about the debt. When I left the White House under Jimmy Carter, we had roughly $800 billion of debt. When the country was set up, we had $70 million of debt. When I left the White House, $800 billion. Now we have roughly $35 trillion. So there's nothing to worry about in the sense that if we keep doing what we're doing, we're just going to have a higher percentage of our government going to paying interest. And that's not a good thing. This daisy chain will come to an end when people say they don't want to buy our dollars anymore. Right now, the United States does not have a sovereign wealth fund. We have a printing press, and we keep printing dollars, and people keep buying them. At some point, when people say, I don't want those dollars because they're going to be devalued so much, they aren't going to buy them anymore. And so I don't know when that's going to be, 5 years or 10 years from now, but at some point, people will stop buying our dollars the way they stopped buying the British pound or the Dutch guilder many, many centuries ago. So I do worry about that. But for the foreseeable future, I don't think that Washington is going to change or New York is going to change in terms of our ability to fund this debt. We're paying, our budget each year is roughly 1/3 is almost debt. And deficit every year is about 1/3 debt. And you can do that for a while, but not forever.
Yeah. We need interest rates to stay low or lower.
Well, when interest rates were low, we didn't pay that much attention to it. But with interest rates being relatively high, we're paying almost as much in interest as we're paying in the defense expenditure of our country.
Yeah. You talked about the dysfunction in our government, but you've also made it a point to try to bring policymakers together. In fact, I think you're hosting an ongoing bipartisan dinner. Can you maybe give our audience a seat at the table and touch on why you're doing this and what have you learned from it?
Well, for the last 8 years, roughly once a month, I host a dinner for members of Congress only, though they can bring a guest. And I ask them to sit with people from the opposite party and the opposite house so they get to know people better than they otherwise would. And I typically interview a great American historian to give people who are making our laws a greater sense of our history. The theory is if people who make our laws know more about our history, maybe the laws would be better. But also, I really want to have people to come together. And members of Congress tell me, maybe this is sad, this is the most interesting thing they're doing in Congress, is going to these dinners. Now, you would think that they're passing legislation would be more interesting, but they like these dinners because they get to talk with people from the opposite party and the opposite house. Right now, we don't have conference committees anymore. It used to be when legislation was passed the House or the Senate, they have a conference committee. Almost all the legislation now is done in the leadership offices. There are virtually no conference committees to speak of. And as a result, members of the House and Senate don't really work with each other that much anymore. And there aren't congressional delegations going abroad anymore because of the controversy of them. So most of these people in the House and the Senate don't know each other. And many people who are Democrats or Republicans are not really allowed to be seen in public having lunches or dinners with people from the opposite party. So there's no press here. And so people can come and be seen with people in the opposite party and not have to worry that somebody's going to criticize them for it. So I think I've learned that members of Congress want to do the right thing, but they're in a system that is really constraining their ability to do so.
Is there a wait list for this? I'm sure.
Well, if you want to come, let me know.
All right, we'll do. We'll do. David, you clearly have a lot of passion for our country, which also shows through how you spend both your time and your money. And you've built a reputation as a patriotic philanthropist. What does this mean, and why is it important?
Well, I coined the term patriotic philanthropy to connote what I was trying to do with some of my philanthropy, which is to remind people of the history and heritage of our country. The theory is, if you know more about the past, you're not likely to make the same mistakes as you made in the past. And that's the reason we want to learn about history. And right now, many people in our country don't know much about the government, the way it operates, or civics, or things like that. Now, I can tell from your accent that you were probably not born in the Bronx. Is that right?
No.
Where were you born?
Istanbul.
Okay, so are you a naturalized American?
Yes.
Okay. To be a naturalized American, you have to pass a citizenship test.
Yes.
And you typically have to pass 10 questions. And if you're over 65, they tell you exactly which 10 questions they're going to give you. You're obviously not in that category. But when you pass those 10 questions, they are like, how many branches are there in the federal government? Who was the first president of the United States? 91% of the people that take that test pass. 91% of naturalized prospective citizens pass. The same test was essentially given to people all over the country who were native born. And in only one state, Vermont, could a majority of citizens pass that test, which shows you people born here don't know much about our government. And the theory of a representative democracy, as Jefferson would say, is you have to have an informed citizenry. Thomas Jefferson believed that if the citizenry is informed, you can have a better representative democracy. So what I'm trying to do with patriotic philanthropy is to inform people a little bit better about the way our country operates and our history, and the hope that that might lead to a more representative and better government.
Yeah. Education is the key to many, many things. And
education is the key to people's success. Now, you can drop out of college like Bill Gates and you get lucky, and Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college, but most people are not going to be Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg. Getting as much education as you can is really the key to success in the Western world as we know it.
David, you made also another fairly big time and money investment recently with the purchase of Baltimore Orioles. As a kid growing up, was this always your dream?
Well, I was growing up in Baltimore, and the Orioles were obviously our hometown baseball team, and I idolized them like many young people do when they're young, particularly young boys at that time, idolized their teams. This wasn't a lifelong passion necessarily, but I've tried to give back to our country with some of my philanthropic gifts, and I wanted to give back to Baltimore, where I got a public school education that was very good. So I thought if I could come in and help in some ways make the team better, and it's a good team already, I would be giving back to the hometown that gave me a very good public education, where the hometown that my parents were raised at, that they were married in, and that they were buried in, and the same town that I was raised in and that I will be buried in. So I wanted to do something for Baltimore.
True, my husband went to Johns Hopkins, so when we started dating, it's one of the first places he took me to Baltimore.
Well, it must be a great thing because you got married, right?
Exactly. Good.
So you come to an Orioles game?
I would love to. Although I don't know much about baseball, even though I've been in this country for a long time, but I would love to come.
Okay, well, we'll get a date that you can come.
Love to come. So last week you attended, I think, your first game as the owner. But I'm sure it wasn't anything but a normal opening day, as obviously the community is grappling with the collapse of this Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse you talked about. Can you maybe talk about what this bridge means to the city of Baltimore and any insights that you might have in terms of how the rebuild will take shape? You said it might take 10 years.
I met with President Biden the other day, 2 days ago, and he told me he'd be going there on Friday. And the governor, I talked to the governor yesterday, and the governor is going to be going as well with the president. And they will announce something there that I won't preempt them in talking about it. But clearly they're going to do something that will aid Baltimore. But it's a very important bridge because it's an important route around Baltimore. Many people use it to get to work every day. And of course, the bridge itself is high enough so ships are theoretically supposed to go under it. It's one of the most important ports in our country. So it's really the lifeblood, to some extent, of Baltimore. And it's a tragic loss of life and a tragic decline in the economic prosperity of Baltimore that will be affected by this for some time. Hopefully the bridge can be rebuilt. In the meantime, we have to find ways around it and need to do something to help the people whose jobs have been lost because of this. And there'll be some announcement about that tomorrow.
Okay, looking forward to the announcement.
Okay.
And I have one last question for you, because I always like to end our client events on an optimistic note. Despite all the challenges we talked about, the partisan divide, infrastructure, our debt, what makes you optimistic about the future of our country?
Well, that there are good money managers like UBS that are out there managing people's money, and they're making certain that people can retire with good amounts of money. So I'm always optimistic about that. I'm always optimistic that the country will come together. As Winston Churchill used to say famously, the United States will consider every option. In the end, it will finally come to the right decision. So while we have a lot of division in our country and we have a lot of political turmoil, in the end, the country will do the right thing and the government will do the right thing, I think, for the American people. So I'm optimistic about the country's future.
Yeah. That's why I guess a lot of people like me come here.
Okay, well, we have 50 million immigrants in this country. Yeah. No other country in the world has anything close to that. That's because this country is welcoming to people like that. And also, they believe in the American dream. People come here really believe in the American dream, even more than people born here.
Yeah. Thank you. David, thank you so much for your time and for being here in the studio. And to all of our clients, thank you for spending the last, half hour with us. I hope that you found the discussion as insightful as I did. As always, I encourage you to follow up with your UBS financial advisor to discuss what this all means for your own portfolio. And we will continue to feature a steady stream of insights leading up to the November elections from both our CIO team and external experts, like you heard from today. For the latest, you can always visit ubs.com/ElectionWatch. Thank you.